Okay, here we go to an episode of On the Rest from Off the Cuff to have a really cool premiere for you guys from the brand Zelos. A little about them, they were founded back in 2014 and they're a microbrand with a unique overbuild design aesthetic and a huge popularity for just making really cool watches. Now in terms of type of watches, this is a dive watch, some key common characteristics and design when you're looking for a diver. Of course, you're going to find water resistance typically paired to some type of screw down crown. You want something that's tough, legible, with a dive time bezel and a diver's extension is always nice if on bracelet. This is their latest Blacktip Skindiver in the Whirlpool colorway, and it's an updated, sleeker version of their take on the classic Skindiver, now with even better dialed in proportions. This is going to go for $3.99 for the Whirlpool dial as seen, or you can get it in more expensive variations for about $50 to $100 more. And the link should be live by tomorrow, December 8th. By the time you guys see this video. So with all that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, yes, so in typical Zelos fashion, this one really pops. Now, in terms of the dimensions, 41 millimeters in diameter, about 12.8 millimeters thick, and that is including that crystal there, which does have a very slight dome to it. And then you do have also a 47.7 millimeter lug to lug, 316L stainless steel construction, brushed and polished finishes, and you can see, again, kind of like what they're synonymous with, a very high level of fit and finish. Look at the bevels. Of course, you're going to see a couple of my fingerprints on there. Let me give it a quick wipe just to give you guys a nice idea of how this renders. Look at the craftsmanship there. Very nice execution. Great fine details. Look at the beveling all along this H-link bracelet. Very handsome. Now, getting into some other details, I mentioned the sapphire earlier. It is a double dome, so even when you have it at harsh angles there, that means there's a curvature on the top surface as well as the underside, so it's going to have less distortion. A lot of times you'll see with a single dome a lot more distortion. Here you can see at a harsh angle, still relatively legible there. It's really just more about if the camera can focus versus if the crystal is going to add too much visual play there. Now, getting into this bezel action. Very nice acoustics. Great tactile engagement in terms of the grip. Ever so slight play, but nothing to write home about. No lateral play or anything like that. It's really just kind of the ever slight crack you can get it before it's actually moving on you. But, very nice audible clicks there. That again, the nice thing is when you do kind of rock that with the slack out of it, it actually lines up perfectly. So very nice. Now, the insert here, it's not the most legible, and that is kind of by design, guys. It's a matte ceramic that's been, you guys can see, engraved. Now it's been, they cut away essentially, and then the top pieces are actually brushed, so they're going to catch the light in a certain way. Of course, it's, in this case, it's reflecting off of a dark camera lens, so it's not going to be quite as reflective as you would see out in the real world, but I do want to, of course, make this render as just, you know, as realistic as possible while still giving you something that is, again, realistic. I don't want it to distort in terms of what you're seeing. It does have that, again, that multi-finish to it, which you can see contrasting with the matte and then the brushed on top, which is going to give you the contrast as you're looking at it, but not the most high contrast option that there is out there, but I will say it's quite a handsome one. It does kind of recall more expensive looking divers with this particular more complex execution in terms of that ceramic insert. Also, you do have a loomed signed crown, which is very handsome and I think well proportioned. And then inside, although you can't see it, is going to be your Miyota 9015 automatic movement, which has a 42-hour power reserve and beats at 4 hertz or 28,800 vibrations per hour in terms of that beat rate. So you do have that nice solid stamped case back, which is also screw in and does have some nice etching there in terms of some additional information. And then you get into this dial, which is one heck of a dial and kind of what you expect from the brand at this point. Look at that. Oh, yes. Even a bit hard to pick up here, just because once we get more light on it, it can, you know, you're going to get some glare there. And again, that's more a result of the studio lighting versus anything wrong with the anti-reflective coating here. Now, what's happening on the dial is you're getting this CNC guilloche circular pattern with a fume teal dial. So that means you're going to have it be a bit brighter towards the center of the dial and then progressively gradient towards darker as you get to the outer reaches of the dial, which makes sense because you're going to have a better contrast now with these applied indices, which are quite bright. You can see here because they're quite bold. Even in daylight, they stand out. But, ooh, yes, it comes together well. It looks very good. Some might think it's a little overly busy, overly complicated. I think it's a decent balance in terms of really just giving you some signature iconography for their own brand to stand out from this, you know, at face value is a very traditional a skin diver aesthetic. You have boxed lugs, you have a 41 millimeter setup, you have a relatively expansive dial with a smaller dial to bezel ratio in terms of the bezel being a little bit smaller and the dial being a bit larger and more expansive. Now, you do have a mixture of C3 and BGW9 Super Luminova, which is going to be nice in terms of the different colors that you're going to see here when we do get this dark. And then that also does depend on which color variation in terms of the dial. But it's one of those ones where, yeah, they're kind of good with that play and giving you something that is going to not only pop here in good lighting, but also popping in, you know, low light transition as well as complete blackout situations. Now getting into the bracelet, 20 millimeter lugs, drilled as well, which is very, very nice. This beautifully solid bracelet. It's solid in terms of the links, the end links, everything. You even do get a very nice screw pin construction there. You can see even on the non-screw side, look at how uniform and clean that is. And this does have a beautiful, again, it just feels very solid. Decent little taper there. Goes from 20 millimeters down to 18, which is going to be, of course, just a 2 millimeter taper. Nothing drastic, but I think it suits it quite nicely. And then you get to this milled clasp, which is one of their newer ones, which is, again, I think what most people are going to really, really appreciate here. Fully milled push button, whether it be push button to open the clasp or push button to actuate the extension. Check that out. Very, very nice. So if you do need a little bit of extra relief, you can absolutely do that while it is actually on the wrist. You can extend it and then you can, of course, push it back in and ratchet it accordingly. Scissor function here, fully milled. No extra contouring there, but not necessarily needed when it's a thin scissor section, as you see there, but very handsomely finished. So with that said, let's actually get it on the wrist and see how it wears. Okay, as you can see on my 7.5 inch wrist, this wears quite well. Of course, my wrist is on the slightly larger side of average at 7.5 inches or 19 centimeters in circumference, but you can see it's not necessarily a really flat and wide accommodating wrist. It's actually quite a tall and round wrist. So, I am somebody that does have to be aware and considerate of lug to lug, of ultimate dimensions, as well as just general overall proportions when it comes to choosing the watch to wear. Ooh, this. Yes, it's a good looking watch. Again, I like that it feels full-sized, not undersized or oversized. It hits that kind of Goldilocks sweet spot. Of course, if I get my wrist a bit too close to the camera lens, you're going to notice a fair amount of perspective distortion. All of a sudden, the watch head seems much larger, and the sides of the bracelet seem to just fall away, versus down here, look, all of a sudden a bit more proportionate. And that, again, has to do with the perspective distortion. So what I'll do is I'll leave my wrist nice and low and then just tighten up the frame here so that you guys can get, a little bit more of a realistic view as your eye would perceive it without, again, that additional distortion, which is why when you're scrolling through Instagram, smaller watches always look better. And that's because they're just going to photograph better on your camera phone's wide angle lens. So, as you can see here, though, very cool. I like the proportions. You have that kind of top hat style of bezel grip there where you have a bit of gap, which I think visually just looks quite clean. I can appreciate that. And it also really accentuates the thinness on that mid case, which does have that beautiful bevel that goes all the way across. And it even has a bit of an undercut there on the underside, which also helps it, again, appear quite thin, even though it actually, numbers-wise, is relatively thin at 12.8 millimeters. That's not super thick or anything like that, especially for a dive watch, which can be, known to be quite thick and chunky. This, again, I think is a nice little balance there, and that's kind of the whole point of this particular model, right? Being that Skindiver, being a bit of a sweet spot there, not meant to be too retro, not meant to be too modern or contemporary. It just, again, hits a bit of a sweet spot, and I think this particular dial colorway is the sweet spot for me. Of course, knowing Zelos, they have tons of different options every release, but this one definitely resonates with me. And bonus here is it's actually the cheapest variation as well, and it doesn't lose a step in terms of how special it feels. So I dig that. So with that said, let's actually get this now off the wrist, set up for some Lume shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Yes, very nice bright Lume, and you can see a nice play with blue and green in terms of that. Even the little tick marks, if you're noticing, are also loomed there on that kind of outer little timing ring, which is very, very cool. You might even catch a bit of extra lume there, even at this angle of that, the crown, which is also signed and loomed. Let me try to hit it at an angle here, the black light. You can see it really light up now. So I think that's pretty cool. I do like that. And these are great with lume. Again, it's going to look dynamic in the dark, dynamic in the light as well. But one thing I always like to work in is going to be a bit of a low light transition, because you're always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it is nice with these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting. And my goodness, guys, look at this dial. That whirlpool effect is just handsome. And then the play of colors, the pop of yellow on the seconds hand, that blue with all these different hues and tones looks fantastic. And then you have it framed by this little bit of a more sedate bezel, which makes it a bit more understated and I think more wearable for everyday use. So looks very cool. And that's just the watch case. That's really just the dial and bezel. But then you start looking at the bevels, the little details, the brushing, the pops, in between the satin brush where everything is so uniformly gliding in terms of the light. And then, of course, you have the deep glossy polish, which is also playing over everything quite nicely. It's a great looking watch, and again, it's not for everybody. Zelos as a brand isn't for everybody. It's for enthusiasts, really. I don't see this being a very casual. There are some models I think could have some casual functional crossover, but for the most part, again, these watches are designed for folks who have a collection of watches, who enjoy watches, and really enjoy everything that comes with the beauty and the artistry of watchmaking. And it's very cool to see that happening in such a young brand. So getting into some closing thoughts, guys, on the wrist, this wears larger than the Seiko SPB143, right, which is that 62 modern 62 MAS kind of reimagining that's very popular, and that's due to the more expansive dial to bezel ratio. You have a bit more of an open dial, so that's where they really went a little bit more modern on the Seiko side with the 143, where they have a bit of a thicker bezel, which again, it makes it feel more I should say more modern, similar to like a modern Rolex sub versus an old school big crown sub, right, where you're gonna have bigger dial, smaller bezel kind of insert width. Here, on the modern side, things have kind of reversed, where people have a bit of a smaller dial and a bigger bezel insert. So also, when we look at these contours, they do keep the visual weight down. They have this thinner mid case that also looks very impressive, paired to that top hat bezel grip, which is functionally very nice and design-wise also quite handsome and reminiscent of, other references like, some old school Seamasters and stuff like that. Although the coin portion of the bezel is quite different. That kind of top hat aesthetic is something that does recall those other references. In terms of model variants, definitely check the site links for options and availability. Again, they should be available depending on when you're watching this, they'll either be available tomorrow or they've already been available for a while. So good on you, goodwill hunting on that, because these do sell out pretty quick. And with this being the cheapest and in my eyes the most handsome model, I wouldn't see why this wouldn't be the first one to sell out. In terms of comparable models, guys, at under $500, and I mean a good amount, well under $500 for this particular unit, this is $1 under $400. Zelos really continue to offer some of the very best bang per buck options on the market today, uniquely delivering both feature-rich and design-heavy timepieces, which isn't always the case. I'd say the more rule of thumb is going to be these watches that are very spec heavy but very low in design, because they're just purely homages, and then they're just offering you a great spec list and in a semi-familiar aesthetic, versus here you're going to have an unfamiliar aesthetic for the most part, unless you're a fan of the brand. So for me, guys, bottom line, Zelos have really established themselves as a solid varsity level micro brand, hovering above your average freshman and JV offerings, and this release is no different. While many brands are fighting to stand out and establish their own signature design language, Zelos continue to blaze their own trail with models like the Blacktip, improving and evolving with each new iteration. So that's what you gotta love here, guys. You get something, it's fresh, it's new, but then it's also semi-familiar for the collectors. But it's still fresh enough to where if you were not indoctrined in this crazy, watch idiot savant kind of lifestyle, you're going to be still quite pleased by how refreshing the design language is. So with all that said, let me know what you all think down in the comments below. If you like the video, please hit like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.